It all started on what should have been a quiet weekend morning. The neighborhood sat in a tidy pocket of suburban order, rows of carefully manicured lawns lined with mailbox posts that all looked the same. The homeowners association liked it that way. They liked uniformity, they liked neatness, and they liked control. But what they didn't like, what they absolutely couldn't tolerate, was anything that strayed from the rigid image they had built for the community. And that was exactly where the trouble began. Tucked at the edge of the neighborhood sat a small property, not much different in size than the others, but different in spirit. It belonged to a man who had no interest in ornamental flower beds or color-coded shutters. He had grown up with land, animals, and work that came with both. So when he bought the house, he made sure to bring along a companion that mattered more to him than any garden decoration ever could. His goat, named Jasper. Jasper wasn't just an animal. He was loyal, stubborn, and brimming with mischief. He roamed the fenced yard, kept the grass shorter than any mower could, and greeted visitors with the occasional low bleat. To the man, Jasper was a reminder of home, of freedom, and of a life not dictated by neighborhood committees. To the HOA, Jasper was a violation of nearly everything they stood for. The first complaints were quiet. Notes slipped under the door, reminders tucked into the mailbox about pet restrictions and community guidelines. But Jasper wasn't a dog, and he certainly wasn't a cat. He was livestock, and technically the rules weren't written with goats in mind. That loophole irritated the HOA more than anything else. And at the center of the irritation was one woman, Karen. Karen was the kind of neighbor who thrived on control. She prowled the sidewalks with a clipboard, peering over fences, sniffing out rule violations like a detective convinced the whole street was conspiring against her. She lived directly across from Jasper's yard, and every morning she had a clear view of the goat chewing lazily on weeds near the fence line. It ate at her day by day, as if the goat were personally mocking her authority. She tried warnings at first. Standing at her own curb, hands on hips, glaring at the fence as though Jasper might suddenly understand English and march himself out of the neighborhood. When that didn't work, she started calling meetings, dragging other neighbors into her obsession. Some shrugged it off, saying the goat wasn't hurting anyone. Others secretly enjoyed watching Karen stew in her frustration. But Karen was not the type to let go. One morning she snapped. She stormed across the street, her footsteps loud on the pavement, the sun already rising high enough to catch the edge of her sunglasses. She marched up to the fence, leaned over the railing, and started shouting. Her voice cut through the calm air like a blade, sharp and grating, directed at the goat who only blinked back with mild curiosity. Jasper had been through storms, coyotes, and plenty of farmyard chaos in his life. But he had never been confronted by something quite like Karen. She waved her arms, pointed fingers, and scolded him as though he were a misbehaving child. Her voice rose higher, echoing off the quiet houses. Jasper tilted his head, flicked his ears, and lowered his stance ever so slightly. Neighbors peeked through blinds, curious about the commotion. A few whispered laughs escaped from porches across the street. Everyone knew Karen's temper, but no one could predict what would happen next. The shouting only grew louder. Karen jabbed a finger toward Jasper, her voice carrying across the block. To her, this was a battle of principle. She believed she was the last line of defense against the decay of neighborhood order. To Jasper, it was just noise, intrusive, irritating, and unwelcome. And Jasper, unlike most of the neighbors, had no intention of letting the noise continue. With a sudden burst of energy, Jasper lunged forward. His horns caught the slats of the wooden fence just right, and the force of the headbutt rattled the posts like a clap of thunder. Karen, leaning too close for her own safety, was caught off guard. The impact lifted her off her balance, knocking her backward with a force that sent her sprawling into the patch of grass behind her. The sound of her shriek carried even farther than her shouting had. The neighborhood froze. Curtains twitched open wider. Someone stifled a laugh. Karen lay stunned on the ground, her sunglasses askew, her clipboard skittered a few feet away. Jasper, meanwhile, stepped back unimpressed and resumed chewing as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. For a moment, silence ruled the street. Then came the murmurs, the muffled snickers, the whispers spreading from one porch to another. Karen scrambled to her feet, brushing herself off, her face flushed with rage and embarrassment. She shouted something about lawsuits and animal control, but her voice no longer carried the same power it had minutes before. Instead of commanding the neighborhood, she had become the spectacle of it. Jasper stood calm inside the fence, a quiet victor. But everyone knew this was not the end. Karen was humiliated, and humiliation is a dangerous fuel for someone who thrives on control. She wouldn't let this go. If anything, the headbutt through the fence had only lit a fire under her. And as the neighbors returned to their quiet gossip, the man inside the house knew exactly what was coming. Karen would not forgive, she would escalate. And Jasper, stubborn as he was, would not back down either. The first clash had ended with a fence rattling and a fall into the grass. But the war for the neighborhood had only just begun. Karen's humiliation lingered like a storm cloud over the neighborhood. For most people, the embarrassment of being knocked backward by a goat would have been enough to convince them to let the matter rest. But Karen was not most people. To her, the headbutt wasn't just a physical blow, it was a public defeat, witnessed by too many eyes. In her mind, the neighborhood was laughing at her, whispering about her behind closed curtains, replaying her stumble every time they looked her way. And Karen could not allow that. Within hours of the incident, she was back in action, clipboard clutched tighter than ever, her pen scratching furiously across complaint forms. She filed not one but several reports to the HOA, each one longer and angrier than the last. She listed supposed violations, unauthorized livestock, noise disturbances, property value threats. She even exaggerated the headbutt, claiming Jasper had broken through the fence and launched a direct attack. The more she wrote, the more the story grew in her imagination, shifting from embarrassment to a tale of victimhood. The HOA board received the stack of complaints with mixed reactions. Some members sighed, knowing Karen's reputation for dramatics. Others, however, saw an opportunity. The HOA thrived on control, and Jasper was undeniably a disruption to the carefully curated image of the community. Even if the rules were vague about livestock, Karen's incident gave them leverage. At the very least, they could pressure the goat's owner into compliance or force him out altogether. Not content with paperwork alone, Karen escalated further. She called animal control, painting a picture of a dangerous, aggressive goat terrorizing the block. She reached out to local law enforcement, spinning the story into something resembling an assault. She even canvassed the neighborhood, cornering residents on their porches, trying to rally them into outrage. But here, her efforts began to falter. Many neighbors had seen the incident with their own eyes, and they knew the truth. Jasper had not escaped the fence. He had not attacked without reason. He had simply defended his space against a woman who had been shouting at him. Some sympathized quietly with the goat. Others outright smirked when Karen brought it up. A few even admired Jasper's timing, as though he had done what the rest of them secretly wished they could do, shut Karen up. Karen noticed the lack of support, and it only deepened her obsession. If the neighbors wouldn't stand with her, she would force the issue through authority. She doubled down, filing appeal after appeal, showing up at HOA offices in person, demanding that immediate action be taken. Meanwhile, life for Jasper and his owner went on much the same. Jasper grazed peacefully in the yard, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. The man who cared for him had grown used to the HOA's complaints and Karen's theatrics, though even he could sense this time was different. Karen's pride had been wounded, and that made her more dangerous than ever. Weeks passed, and tensions thickened. Then came the official notice. The HOA, citing community safety and uniformity, demanded that Jasper be removed from the property within 30 days. Failure to comply, the letter warned, would result in fines, legal action, and possible foreclosure proceedings. The notice sent ripples through the neighborhood. Some residents muttered about overreach, others stayed silent out of fear of drawing Karen's wrath. But a handful began to rally quietly behind Jasper, slipping words of encouragement to his owner, whispering that they loved seeing the goat by the fence, that he brought life and charm to a street otherwise smothered in rules. Karen, however, was triumphant. She strutted around the block, head held high, sunglasses perched just so, her clipboard tapping against her side like a badge of victory. To her, the notice was proof that she was right all along, that her authority had prevailed. She believed the countdown to Jasper's removal had already begun. But Karen underestimated two things: Jasper's stubbornness and his owner's resolve. Neither intended to back down. Instead of preparing to surrender the goat, the man began researching. He combed through HOA bylaws, scrutinized city ordinances, and uncovered the same loophole that had protected Jasper before. The rules banned livestock explicitly used for farming purposes, but Jasper was categorized as a companion animal. It was a thin but crucial line, one the HOA would struggle to erase without rewriting their entire charter. Karen didn't know it yet, but her so-called victory was already crumbling. And as she celebrated, Jasper continued his quiet watch at the fence, his eyes following her whenever she passed by. It was almost as though he knew the feud wasn't over, that another clash was coming. That clash arrived sooner than expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the lawns, Karen decided to test her dominion again. She marched to the fence, her phone held high, recording video as she berated Jasper from the sidewalk. She accused him of being a threat, of endangering children, of ruining the neighborhood. Her voice, shrill and relentless, cut through the evening air. Neighbors peeked from porches again, shaking their heads, but Karen was too focused on her performance to notice. Jasper, however, noticed. His ears twitched, his stance shifted, and he lowered his head in that familiar way. Karen leaned closer, pointing at him through the slats of the fence, shouting louder for the sake of her recording. She was building a case, or so she thought. But Jasper was building something else. With a sudden burst of energy, he rammed the fence again, harder this time. The wood shuddered, one slat cracking under the force. Karen yelped and stumbled back, nearly dropping her phone. The crack in the fence was small but symbolic. The line between control and defiance was weakening. The neighbors saw it. Karen saw it. And most importantly, Jasper's owner saw it. This battle was escalating beyond noise complaints and reports. It was becoming a spectacle, a war of pride and persistence. And deep down, everyone knew one thing: the goat wasn't going anywhere. The neighborhood was no longer divided over simple bylaws. It was divided between those who feared Karen's wrath and those who silently cheered every time Jasper stood his ground. The 30-day deadline loomed, and Karen's obsession burned hotter than ever. But as the fence bore its first crack, it was clear this fight was heading somewhere far more explosive. The crack in the fence was more than just splintered wood. It was a warning, a sign that this feud was breaking past the limits of control Karen thought she had. For anyone else, it might have been a moment to reconsider, to step back and admit that maybe the battle wasn't worth the cost. But Karen wasn't wired for retreat. The embarrassment of falling once, the humiliation of neighbors laughing behind curtains, and now the defiance of a goat that refused to be removed. These things gnawed at her pride until she could think of nothing else. To Karen, the goat had become a symbol. He wasn't just Jasper anymore. He was rebellion in hooves, a living reminder that someone in the neighborhood dared to ignore her authority, and symbols in Karen's mind had to be destroyed. The 30-day deadline crept closer, and Karen grew restless. The HOA board had promised action, but bureaucracy moved slower than her rage. She wasn't content to wait. She wanted results, and she wanted them now, so she set her sights higher. She began dialing numbers outside the neighborhood. First came animal control. She called again and again, her complaints growing more exaggerated with each report. She described Jasper as violent, aggressive, and uncontrollable. She claimed he had charged children, torn up lawns, and broken fences beyond repair. But when animal control officers arrived, clipboard in hand, what they found was a goat quietly munching dandelions in his yard. His fence, though cracked, still held him in place. He bleated once, chewed his cud, and looked at them with wide, harmless eyes. The officers left unconvinced. Their reports listed Jasper as contained, non-threatening, and properly cared for. Karen, furious at their indifference, accused them of incompetence and stormed back across the street, her voice carrying far enough for half the block to hear. But she didn't stop there. Next came law enforcement. Karen marched into the local police station, filing yet another complaint. She spoke of assaults, of danger to the community, of a goat with a history of violence. The officers listened politely, but the more Karen ranted, the less credibility she carried. They had more pressing matters than a suburban feud with livestock. Still, They sent a cruiser by for a welfare check just to cover their bases. The sight of a patrol car parked near Jasper's yard stirred curiosity among the neighbors. People peeked out again, wondering what the commotion was this time. The officers, much like animal control, found nothing dangerous. Just a goat in a yard, a man sitting on his porch, and a fence in need of minor repair. After a brief conversation, they left, leaving Karen seething in their wake. The neighborhood chuckled quietly, but beneath the laughter, tension thickened. Karen was running out of patience. The authorities weren't taking her seriously, the HOA's deadline hadn't yet arrived, and Jasper's owner seemed completely unfazed. Each day that Jasper grazed peacefully behind his fence was another day Karen felt her control slipping. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. Late one afternoon, under the guise of tending to her flower beds, Karen crept closer to Jasper's fence. She carried with her a spray bottle filled with vinegar and water, convinced she could teach the goat to stay back from the fence line. She crouched low, her eyes darting to make sure no one was watching, and then she sprayed through the slats toward Jasper's face. The reaction wasn't what she expected. Jasper flinched, blinked, and then let out a sharp bleat. Instead of retreating, he lowered his head once more. With a sudden, violent motion, he rammed the weakened section of the fence. The crack widened, wood splintering under the force. Karen yelped, stumbling backward onto her lawn, the spray bottle skittering into the grass. Neighbors who had been watching from porches burst into laughter. Karen scrambled to her feet, shouting about danger and lawsuits, but the damage was done. She had been caught red-handed antagonizing the goat, and Jasper had answered in kind. By now, the feud had become a neighborhood spectacle. Some residents took sides openly, cheering quietly for Jasper, while others avoided Karen altogether to escape being dragged into her crusade. The block no longer felt united under HOA rules. It felt divided between those who lived in fear of Karen's clipboard and those who secretly hoped Jasper would give her another dose of humble pie. But Karen wasn't finished. Humiliation only hardened her determination. If the authorities wouldn't remove Jasper, if the HOA couldn't act quickly enough, then she would find a way to prove the goat was dangerous once and for all. That evening, she devised a plan. She set up cameras along her property, angled toward Jasper's yard, determined to catch any sign of aggression. She baited the fence line with scraps of food, hoping to lure him close enough to capture him misbehaving on video. She even whispered rumors to other neighbors that Jasper had damaged property in the night, planting seeds of suspicion where she could. But her efforts only backfired. The cameras caught nothing but Jasper chewing lazily, pawing at the ground and resting in the sun. The food she tossed was ignored in favor of the grass Jasper had always preferred. And the rumors spread thinner the more people remembered Karen's earlier exaggerations. The more she schemed, the more she looked desperate, and the more the neighbors laughed quietly behind her back. Then came the night that pushed everything past the point of no return. Karen, convinced her cameras weren't enough, decided to confront Jasper directly once again. Armed with a broom this time, she marched to the fence under cover of dusk, poking it through the slats to provoke him. She muttered angrily under her breath, jabbing harder each time Jasper refused to move away. But Jasper was done tolerating her antics. With a sudden roar of strength, he lunged. The broom snapped in half, the fence split wider, and Karen was sent sprawling backward for the third time since the feud began. Her shriek echoed down the block, drawing porch lights and startled faces into the night air. And this time, the damage to the fence wasn't just a crack, it was a breach. One slat had fallen entirely, leaving a jagged gap wide enough for Jasper to poke his head through. He didn't escape, but he stood there defiantly, staring at Karen as if daring her to come closer. The neighbors gasped, murmured, and whispered as Karen scrambled back into her yard, her clothes smeared with dirt, her pride shattered again. The feud had reached its boiling point. The fence was failing. The HOA's deadline was days away, and Karen's obsession had turned her into the very spectacle she feared becoming. The stage was set for the final clash, one that would decide not just Jasper's place in the neighborhood, but the balance of power between Karen's control and the stubborn spirit of a goat who refused to be bullied. The breach in the fence changed everything. What had been a simmering feud became a crisis in the eyes of the HOA. The board called an emergency meeting citing danger to community safety and failure to maintain property standards. Karen attended that meeting with her head held high, demanding immediate removal of Jasper. She painted a dramatic picture of a rampaging goat ready to burst through fences at any moment, endangering children, pets, and property alike. But as much as the HOA wanted control, their authority was limited. They couldn't simply seize an animal without due process. They issued another round of threats, steep fines, daily penalties, and the looming possibility of foreclosure. They believed the pressure would finally break Jasper's owner. Instead, it did the opposite. Armed with research and paperwork, Jasper's owner pushed back. He cited city ordinances that allowed companion animals, pointed out that Jasper was registered as such, and reminded the board that the fence damage had come from provocation many neighbors had witnessed firsthand. He threatened his own legal action if harassment continued. The stalemate only deepened, and the neighborhood grew restless. For some, it was entertainment. For others, it was a headache. But for Karen, it was personal war. She couldn't stand the idea of losing. She had invested too much of her pride into this battle. To admit defeat would mean acknowledging that she had been wrong, that the goat had outsmarted her, that the neighborhood saw her not as a leader but as a spectacle. She wouldn't allow that, so she planned one final move. If she couldn't force Jasper out through paperwork, she would prove once and for all that he was a menace. She waited until a weekend afternoon when the street was busiest, when families were outside, children rode bikes, and neighbors tended lawns. Karen knew eyes would be watching. She marched to the fence, this time with no subtlety, no disguise, no hesitation. She carried her phone in one hand, recording live, and shouted across the street that she was documenting the threat for everyone to see. The goat stood quietly in the yard, chewing as always. But Karen wasn't satisfied with quiet. She leaned over the cracked fence, waving her arms, shouting insults, daring Jasper to react. She wanted the spectacle, wanted the footage that would vindicate her. Jasper, however, had reached his limit. He lowered his head, hooves scraping the dirt, muscles tensing with determination. The neighbors, recognizing the stance, began murmuring warnings. Some chuckled knowingly. Others gasped, already sensing what was coming. Karen, blind to the signs, kept provoking, convinced she would catch proof of aggression. And then it happened. With a thunderous crack, Jasper rammed the fence with everything he had. The weakened section splintered completely, slats exploding outward in a burst of wood and nails. Karen had leaned too close once again, and the force launched her backward in a flailing sprawl across her manicured lawn. Her phone went flying, landing face down in the grass. Her sunglasses snapped. Her carefully pressed clothes were streaked with dirt, and the sound of her scream echoed down the street. The neighborhood erupted. Some laughed openly, no longer bothering to hide it. Others rushed forward not to help Karen, but to make sure Jasper hadn't actually escaped. He hadn't. He stood in his yard, head through the gap, triumphant and unbothered. His tail flicked. His jaw moved slowly as he resumed chewing, as if the entire dramatic explosion had been nothing more than a momentary inconvenience. Karen scrambled to her feet, shrieking about danger, lawsuits, and animal attacks. She demanded the police, demanded the HOA, demanded justice. But this time, no one rallied behind her. The neighbors had seen everything. They knew she had provoked the goat again and again. They knew the headbutt had been self-defense, a natural reaction to constant harassment. And for the first time, they were no longer afraid to say it out loud. Word spread quickly. Videos surfaced online, caught from porches and phones, showing Karen's dramatic tumble in slow motion, Jasper's victorious stance, and the laughter of the neighborhood echoing behind it all. Within hours, Karen wasn't just the talk of the block, she was a viral spectacle. The clip of "The Goat Who Fought the HOA Karen" made its way across social media, drawing millions of views and thousands of comments cheering Jasper as a hero. The fallout was swift. The HOA, embarrassed by the attention, distanced themselves from Karen's crusade. They quietly dropped their demand to remove Jasper, hoping to avoid further scrutiny. Animal control refused to intervene, citing lack of cause. Law enforcement dismissed Karen's repeated calls, noting that she had been the instigator. Karen, once the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, found herself isolated. Neighbors no longer waved when she passed. Parents ushered their kids inside when she appeared. Conversations hushed when she walked by. The woman who had lived for control now found herself powerless, her authority shattered by her own obsession. And across the street, Jasper thrived. His fence was repaired, stronger than before, with neighbors even pitching in to help. He became a mascot of sorts, the stubborn goat who stood up to the HOA and won. Children brought him treats. Families posed for photos near his yard, and visitors passing through the neighborhood asked to see the famous goat. As for Karen, her bitterness only grew, but her influence was gone. No one listened when she complained. No one feared her clipboard. The more she tried to rally against Jasper, the more people rolled their eyes, reminding her of the video that would never disappear from the internet. The feud was over. The HOA had been humbled. The neighborhood had chosen its side, and the goat, stubborn and steady, had claimed victory not just through force, but through persistence, patience, and the unshakable refusal to be bullied. The final irony was clear to everyone but Karen. She had tried to make Jasper the villain, but in the end, she had made him the hero. And every time Jasper stood at the fence, calm and unbothered, the neighbors smiled, because they knew that no matter how loud Karen shouted, the goat had already won.